Europa Universalis War is a game I'm intending to get into sooner rather than later. And now I do own all the DLC, which is a rare achievement by itself. Except for the new DLC that is coming, that is the King of Kings. This is a game where I want to create my own stories, and the King of Kings DLC is incredibly special for this reason. That's because there's new mission trees for Mamluk Egypt, the Byzantine Empire, and Safavid Persia. Plus, you can rebuild a Zoroastrian Empire, which is also an interesting alternative. Now, for Egypt, one of the things I'm liking about it is I really love the attention to detail that they've put on Egyptian history, and the way Egypt modernized, and the way Egypt was supposed to be. And this is an interesting alternate history what if DLC. In fact, if you read the Death Diaries, this would be the perfect blueprint for someone to create an alternate history novel based on, let's say, the Egyptians, the Byzantines, and the Persians. You know, history could have gone a very different way had either of these three empires survived at one point or the other. And here's another thing. After Napoleon's withdrawal from Egypt, French influence, in fact even European Westernization, slowly began to take its roots within Egypt itself. I mean, even if you go to Egypt today, it's very much inspired by the French and the British, but those links of what Napoleon started still endure even to this day in Egypt. So I think it's a really special tribute in this as well. So this is a nice attention to detail. And on top of this, we're getting new unit rework. We're going to be getting a new 170 new historical events, which I'm sure are related to also having more old factions getting new rework. This is DLC content that I think in the historical strategy game in right now, this is value for money. Right? DLC content that improves the old game and enhances it. And there are some franchises which I think will take a level or two of credit from it. Well, not credit, but exactly a little bit of a cue, to say the least. You know, we're getting new soundtracks, and Europa Universalis 4 has this wonderful ambient cell soundtrack that really fits the theme. But the areas of, let's say, the Egyptians, the Persians, and the Byzantines getting new governmental organizations, I think new reforms, new stats, new everything is a really awesome thing. So, our first focus will be on Persia, where you'll be focusing on the rise of Ismail I. And while you will gain permanent claims on the Tabriz and Shirvan areas, you will have problems to deal with rebellions, incursions, you name it. You've got historical events focused on Ismail's rule. The Persians will be getting new buffs in terms of economy to make them on par with the Ottoman and Mughal neighbors, and this is a good decision, because the Persians in this time period were no pushovers, and they were the ones that literally kept the Ottomans from really expanding even further. So for the economy, you will also get 15% manpower recovery, which is great, so that means also you will be able to replenish your numbers, and you also get 10% manpower recovery speed, which is great. And if you increase the crown lands, your national tax modifies 15%, so you obviously get including that as well. Let's move on to the Persian mission tree, which itself is so huge that what I'm trying to fit on the screen won't fit it. There's a lot of unique missions, so India, coffers, the riches of Asia, and the Silk Road. And no doubt that it is one of the largest mission trees for a faction of this game. You can read this in more detail with the dev diary provided in the description box down below. But this is a summary of what I think could be good. You know, there's more detail about military functions, which orders to add, what you want to do. It's so in depth that quite frankly, the more I read about these new changes, I know there's passion, I know there's a lot of great content coming within Persia itself. Now let's move on to the Mamluks. And the Mamluks have some interesting objectives. From the start, they'll be facing pressures on the Syrian border and have to contend with rebellions from rival factions. The Mamelukes are a powerful body within the hierarchy of medieval Egyptian society as of this time. As a result, they have to focus on expanding Mameluke influence across the deserts of Arabia, to the southeast, Tunisia, Morocco, the Ethiopians to the south, and the Safavids. There's never one single direction you could expand from, however. There's a lot of interesting sandbox style scenarios you can take here and there. You want to focus on, let's say, Arabia, you can go Arabia. You want to go to Tunisia, you want to go to Tunisia. There is a lot of interesting alternate narratives you can create. And many of these missions are focused on Egyptian history and also focus on what the Mamelukes had to contend with between the 14th and 16th centuries. there have been changes to the mission tree of the Mamelukes, focusing on making it easier for the player to use them. So instead of modifier stacks, you have to rely on growth and more or less take your time. The focus is taken on simpler steps. So if you build a Mamluk fleet, for example, you have dilemmas and choices. So it's not just a simple, I'll get plus 15 this, minus 15 this. If you actually build a fleet, it helps bolster your nation. But you don't just gain a modified stack to a certain event. You got those dilemmas and choices, as I've said. The devs have said that doing this has helped the AI improve upon the mission tree. The key aim is to make sure that the mission tree itself isn't overbearing, and I agree. EU4 has had this area where, although I am a newcomer in many ways, but when I've seen the mission tree, when I tried to engage in the past, it's been a bit too complex. And I really like that they are simplifying certain mechanics for certain factions. Now when I was talking with EU fans on their Discord, I asked them, look, what's the best faction? They said it's the Ottomans. And I agree, the Ottomans are the best starting faction. But if the Mamelukes can become a good starting faction, then why not? And I think for newcomers it's absolutely great. And for those that are on the EU4 subscription, which means you can play all the DLC, which is an amazing deal by the way, this Egyptian faction would be absolutely fantastic. In fact, if you're playing the Ottomans, why not play the Mamelukes? Why not play them indeed? So, simpler mission trees with a clear goal helps against the goal of complexity. Sometimes fun is needed at the expense of too much realism. Also, there are 6 new estate agendas for the Mamelukes, which is fantastic, and you can hone your army through government reform. There was something that stood out to me when I read the dev diary. The building of the Canal of the Pharaohs, which will become a predecessor of the Suez Canal. Why was this so important? Because this public canal connected Cairo with the Red Sea, and the Mamelukes intended to ally with the Venetians to rebuild it, extend it, to weaken the Portuguese who had discovered the sea route to India through the Cape of Good Hope. And when the Ottomans took over this never came to fruition. And when you see how the Ottomans fought with the Portuguese, there were a lot of difficulties that they had to face. Because basically, if you couldn't go past this Suez Canal, basically through the Nile, the Portuguese just found a way around. And then it was difficult even then. Logistics, everything plays a factor. But now, you could change that very course of history. And this is such an interesting detail. You know, I like Total War. I love Total War. And I love the fact that Total War is DLC that extends into these really nice historical periods. But somehow there hasn't been that much historical DLC for the older games. And it doesn't feel that the older games are getting that required DLC. Because this game, Europa Universalis, was such an old game by now, but it is still relevant. And even this DLC is adding something new that I didn't even know about. So just think of it for a second. With this much amount to attention, this much amount to historical detail. This is what I want Total War DLC to be. This is what I want Total War to do. If you release Medieval 3, for example, I want DLCs that add something like this, that adds new features, that adds new areas. Now, although this is more or less just my own opinion, but still, this is what amazes me about this game, that even despite the fact that EU4 has not some of the best, because there's a dedicated team working on it, and because there is a dedicated team of developers that are passionate about this game, that are working on it, and that's something that I think is absolutely praiseworthy. So, the Egyptians sound, for me, the most exciting out of all of the factions to play with, because the Egyptians have such an interesting history. I mean, even if you read a book and see how close, I think this all starts after Napoleon's invasion of Egypt, but if you see just even when they had the Mamelukes ruling with the Ayyubids, and you know, the Egyptians were really that close to becoming a great power. Like if you compare the Arabic countries of today, then Egypt would have become that. But you know, civil wars and all sorts of things that just prevented Egypt from becoming its full potential. Otherwise, the Egyptians were at the gates of Constantinople in, I believe, 1839, but I might be wrong on that. That's how close they were. You know, it's a fantastic country with fantastic people. So this really speaks to me in a way that says, let's rebuild Egyptian history in a way that modern Egyptian history would be absolutely fantastic. Anyway, I rambled on enough, but that's why I'm excited for it. In a way, this King of Kings DLC, we just recently had the Legacy of Persia DLC. I mean, it's fantastic that Paradox seems to be the only company that's going into this area of the Middle East, exploring these rich time periods that not much is known about. I think that's absolutely fantastic. So, there's a lot more detail, alright, but check more in the dev diary because it really goes into fantastic detail. And last but not the least, let's go to the Byzantines. The Byzantine Empire, the glorious Byzantine Empire, the empire that may emerge from the ashes and rise again. Look, Byzantine is all about survival in this one. You have religious schisms to deal with, your power is severely reduced, basically you are at the mercy of the Ottomans who are day by day slowly creeping onto you. You were once a powerful and mighty empire and right now you're just reduced to a rump state. And Manzikert just literally devastated it. So you have to deal with rebellions and more. The main aspect is that as Byzantium, you've been equipped with many of the historical crises that led to their demise. Alright? And you have to deal with so much of that it's going to be a bit of a difficulty. This is basically Byzantium playing on a Dark Souls level. That's literally what it is. But can you as a player show that you're able to handle this? That you can turn the tide of history and restore Roman rule and hegemony? I mean, if you can restore Zoroastrian Empire, although I'm not too sure whether you can restore the pagan rule of Rome. I do hope that there is a feature for this in this DLC. You know, the mission trees are so good that they provide a different alternative, but I won't go into too much detail because I have already posted, as you can see here. You can obviously see the mission tree here, but there's so many interesting alternate historical what ifs. You know, this is the reason why I think the Byzantines in, let's say, around 4044 before we got to 4052 is an interesting alternative to play, and I really applaud that they're doing this. I really like the fact that Paradox is going back to the game and they are refixing many of the old factions, giving them more content. And this is something that I think World War needs to do, more or less with the new historical games whenever they come out. But yeah, now I'm going to do more detail, and I know I've repeated myself many times. Read the dev diaries because this is what I want more of. You know, there aren't that many historical video game companies that are making video games on history that are doing things like this. So for what it is, I will take it. This is going to be a great DLC. I think the King of Kings is absolutely going to be looking great. Now, of course, whether it will have a smooth launch or not, whether it could be bug infested in some way or whatever it is, you know, it has happened with Leviathan. The Dominion, I think it's Dominion. Dominion seems to be okay, but let's hope that this releases in a great state, and I can't wait to get my hands into this DLC. So don't forget to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.